Hi there, this is Alex from phpacademy.org and this is a video for the new Boston. In this video I'm going to be talking about mathematical or arithmetic operators inside PHP. Now what we mean by arithmetic operators, if you're a mathematician, if you know anything about maths, you'll understand that these are plus, minus, multiplication and divide. In PHP we also use modulus, which you may have heard of. We use an increment and a decrement. Now let me just talk you through each one of these. Addition, subtraction, multiplication and division are easy. Modulus is where you take two numbers, for example 3 and 10, and we give a remainder. So we say 10 divided by 3 is going to be 3, and then that's a remainder 1. So a modulus of 10 and 3, or 3 and 10, would equal 1. An increment is simply increment a value by 1, and a decrement is simply decreasing a value by 1. So these are more PHP based in terms of the symbols, as well as the multiplication and the division. So let's just get rid of this and we'll go through it. So the first thing we're going to do as an example is we're going to take two numbers, and these are going to be inside variables. In fact, in actual fact, first what we could do is we could create a variable called sum, and we could equal that to a number, and then we need to add, say, or multiply or subtract another number from it. So I'm going to say 10, and from this I'm going to add 20. Remember your line terminator at the end. So all I've simply done is straight away just put a number in there with no quotation marks around it. I've used the plus symbol and I've added that to another number. So now what we can do is we can either type echo here, which I wouldn't recommend, or we could come down and echo out the value of sum, remembering your line terminator. So what we need to do now is preview this in our browser to see if we retrieve the result we want, which should be 30. So sum should now at this point of the program be equal to 30, and then what we can do is echo the result by just echoing out the variable sum. Okay, so let's just refresh, and you can see we've got the value 30 here. Now this is exactly the same with the minus operator. So at this point the value of sum is going to equal minus 10. So let's just double check that works by refreshing in our browser. You can see that it's equal to minus 10. So you've already seen an example of variables, but now we've automatically, this variable has become a minus figure. So everything's very easy to work with. We won't run into too many errors. We can also obviously do multiplication, so we can do 10 times 20. If we refresh in the browser we get the result of 200, which is what we expect, and that's obviously using an asterisk. We can also use our forward slash for division, so 10 divided by 20, and we're going to receive the result 0.5. So these are basic arithmetic operators. What would be a lot neater and easier in this case, especially in larger programs, would be to have two variables. So we can have number 1, and I'm going to make that say 100. And let's just get rid of this line here and this line here. So we're starting with one variable, number 1, and a number 2 that's going to be called, well, that's going to be equal to, let's just say 50. And then I'm going to create another variable called number 3, and I'm going to equal that to 2. So now what I can do is I can start to create a long constructed mathematical operation, if you like, with this. Now there's a few notes to point out, because what we want to do is we want to, as with standard maths, put some operations, some of these mathematical operations in as a priority. So for example, if I was to create a new variable called result, and I was going to say number 1 added to number 2, and I want to divide the whole of this by 2. So all I can do is say divide number 3. So what this is actually reading out as is 100, because our variable number 1 is equal to 100, added to number 2, so our variable number 2 is equal to 50, and we're going to divide this by variable number 3, which is equal to 2. Now in actual fact the way this program or this result is going to work is it's going to perform this that I've selected in blue first, then it's going to add number 1. So if we think about this, reading it as a human, we might say number 1 add number 2. That's going to be 150. And that's going to be divided by number 3, which is the value of 2. So we should receive the result 75. Now let's preview this in our browser. Oh, we haven't echoed it out, so echo result, that's probably the most important part. So refresh. We're actually retrieving the result 125, and the reason for this is we're performing the operation number 2 divided by number 3. So that's 50 divided by 2, which is 25, and then we're adding 100, so we're receiving the result 125. Now, as with normal mathematical operations, the way we go around this is we prioritize different parts of our sum. So we're going to enclose this in brackets, so everything in brackets is going to be happen first, and then we're going to divide by number 3. So you can see by just the addition of these brackets, we refresh and we receive the result 75. Now let's move on to the modulus, and we can see how this works. So let's have a number 1, and we'll have that as 10, and we'll have number 2, and that's going to equal 3. Now we're going to have our result equal to number 1. Now the way we use a modulus is with the percentage sign. So we're saying number 1 mod number 2. So that's 10 mod 3, and with a result we should receive number 1. So we're basically saying what is the remainder of 10 divided by 3, and the remainder is 1. So this is useful in some aspects of development when you need to come up with a remainder of a number for various different reasons, but you'll probably experience that a bit later on. Now let's just take away all our variables except our number 1. What I want to do is I want to create on a new line, say number 1 plus plus. Now if we were to echo out number 1 now, we've actually incremented number 1 by 1. We don't need to assign this to anything, we can just say number 1 plus plus, and I'll explain the reason for that in a minute. You can see that we've got, oh yeah, echo number 1, sorry. So if we refresh, we've got 11. Now why do we need to create this command or this variable increment on its own? The reason for that is this is a shorthand notation of number 1 equals number 1 plus 1. So if we refresh, we've got exactly the same result. However, number 1 plus plus is just a quicker way of doing that. Now the times that you need to use this increment, and of course we can do decrement as well, which is 2 minus signs as opposed to 2 plus signs, that will give us the result of 9, so we've decremented by 1, and then we'll decrease by 1. The reason we do this is because in loops sometimes we need to keep track of how many times the loop has run. So we use, say, a figure, we might use a variable called I, or a variable called n, or anything really, but we want to increment to each time the loop happens, and doing this is just a much quicker way of, instead of writing number 1 equals number 1 plus 1. Obviously if you wanted to increment it by 5, you would do it this way. So if we refresh, that would then read 15. But these are basically the standard operators that you're probably going to use on a day-to-day basis if you're programming. Perhaps not the modulus, but particularly the basic sums, the addition, the subtraction, multiplication, division, and the increment, and perhaps the decrement.